The biggest mistake they made was laughing at the wrong woman. I still remember the exact moment Ethan Carter shattered the room. The crystal chandeliers above us glowed like captured stars. A string quartet played softly in the background. Hundreds of people filled the grand ballroom of the Astoria Grand Hotel in Manhattan, dressed in designer gowns and tailored tuxedos that probably cost more than my annual salary. Every seat was occupied. Every camera was pointed toward the stage. Every conversation had stopped. And standing beneath a spotlight brighter than the noon sun was Ethan Carter, America's favorite billionaire. The man who appeared on magazine covers. The man whose companies employed tens of thousands of people. The man whose engagement announcement had dominated headlines for months. Beside him stood Vanessa Whitmore, beautiful, wealthy, and born into the kind of old money family people wrote books about. They looked perfect together. At least that's what everyone believed. I was standing near the back of the ballroom carrying a silver tray of champagne glasses, trying my best to disappear. Nobody noticed women like me. Nobody ever did. At 27 years old, I had mastered the art of becoming invisible. Invisible employees were easier to ignore. Easier to mock. Easier to forget. That night should have been no different. I was just another hotel server working another 12-hour shift. Another face hidden behind a black uniform. Another woman balancing bills, worrying about hospital payments, and wondering how much longer I could keep everything together. Yet somehow, without realizing it, I had become the reason one of the most powerful men in America was about to change his future forever. Ethan stood at the microphone. His expression was calm. Too calm. The kind of calm that made people nervous. Around me, guests smiled expectantly. Investors. Politicians. Celebrities. Members of New York's elite. They were waiting for a romantic speech. A wedding announcement. A promise of forever. Instead, Ethan looked directly into the crowd and said, "I owe everyone here the truth." The room fell silent. Even the musicians stopped playing. Vanessa's smile stiffened beside him. Ethan inhaled slowly. Then he delivered a sentence nobody expected. "I cannot marry someone when my heart already belongs to another woman." A collective gasp swept through the ballroom. Hundreds of people froze at once. Some looked confused. Others looked horrified. Vanessa's face turned pale. Camera flashes exploded like fireworks. Reporters immediately began whispering to one another. Nobody could believe what they had just heard. The most anticipated engagement in New York had just collapsed in front of everyone. My own hands tightened around the tray. I remember staring at Ethan in disbelief. Because while everyone else was wondering who the mysterious woman was, a terrible feeling had already begun growing inside my chest. Ethan's eyes slowly moved across the crowd. Past politicians. Past celebrities. Past millionaires. Past socialites. Until they landed directly on me. My heart stopped. For one impossible second, it felt like the entire ballroom disappeared. There was only Ethan. Only his gaze. Only the terrifying certainty that something life-changing was about to happen. Then, in front of hundreds of stunned guests and dozens of cameras, Ethan Carter raised his hand and pointed straight at me. I could not breathe. Hundreds of faces turned toward me at the exact same moment. The tray in my hand suddenly felt like it weighed 100 pounds. Reporters twisted in their seats. Guests whispered behind raised hands. Vanessa Whitmore looked from Ethan to me as if she had never seen me before, which honestly made sense because 6 months earlier she probably had not. 6 months earlier, nobody knew my name. I was just Grace Parker, a woman trying to survive one day at a time. Before the headlines. Before the cameras. Before Ethan Carter changed everything. 6 months earlier, my alarm went off at 4:30 in the morning in a one-bedroom apartment in Queens. The sound dragged me out of a sleep that never felt long enough. Outside my window, rain tapped against the glass. Inside, the air smelled faintly like coffee and laundry detergent. My mother was asleep in the next room. At least I hoped she was sleeping. Some nights her condition made that difficult. Hospital bills covered half the kitchen table. Prescription receipts covered the other half. I stared at them while waiting for my coffee maker to finish brewing. Numbers had become a language I hated. Every envelope carried another reminder that life was expensive. By 6 o'clock, I was already on the subway headed into Manhattan. The train rattled beneath the city while exhausted commuters stared at their phones. I wore the same black shoes I had owned for 3 years. The soles were thinning. Replacing them would have to wait. Again. The Astoria Grand Hotel rose above Midtown like a palace made of glass and marble. Guests walked through the revolving doors wearing watches worth more than my car. I spent my mornings serving breakfast to people who discussed stock portfolios before sunrise. Most never looked directly at me. Some did. Those were usually worse. Around 10 that morning, I was carrying a tray through the executive dining room when I heard laughter. A group of socialites occupied the corner table. One of them motioned toward me. I knew immediately what was coming. They thought I could not hear them. They were wrong. One woman commented on my uniform. Another guessed how many jobs I worked. A third laughed and said I looked like someone who had given up on her dreams years ago. I smiled politely because that was what employees were expected to do. Then I kept walking. Their words followed me anyway. They always did. What none of them understood was that being underestimated teaches you things. It teaches patience. It teaches resilience. It teaches you how to keep moving when nobody believes you matter. I finished my shift that afternoon and headed toward the hotel exit. I was exhausted. My feet ached. My phone buzzed with another medical payment reminder. I almost ignored the black leather wallet lying beside the curb outside the hotel entrance. Almost. Then I noticed it had been dropped only moments earlier. I picked it up, brushed away the rainwater, and opened it just enough to find identification. The name inside made my heart stop. Ethan Carter. I stared at the name for several seconds, convinced I had to be mistaken. Ethan Carter. The Ethan Carter. The billionaire whose face appeared on business magazines in grocery store checkout lines. The man people called a visionary. The man who seemed to exist in a completely different universe from mine. Rain dotted the smooth black leather as I stood beneath the hotel awning. Around me, taxis rushed through the wet Manhattan streets. People hurried past carrying umbrellas and expensive briefcases. Nobody seemed to notice the small fortune I was holding in my hands. My first thought was not about money. It was about panic. Losing a wallet was bad enough. Losing one that belonged to Ethan Carter was probably a disaster. I opened it just enough to locate a contact card. There was no cash visible. No dramatic secret hidden inside. Just a driver's license, several business cards, and what looked like important documents folded carefully into one compartment. I could have turned it into hotel security. Most people would have. Instead, something told me to make sure it reached him personally. Maybe it was because I had spent too much of my life watching important things get lost. Maybe it was because my mother always taught me that character mattered most when nobody was watching. Either way, I found myself heading back into the hotel. The executive floor occupied the top levels of the building. Normally employees like me had no reason to go there. The carpets were thicker. The lighting was softer. Even the air somehow smelled more expensive. I approached the reception desk outside a private conference suite and explained the situation. The receptionist's eyes widened the moment she saw the name on the identification card. She disappeared through a set of double doors. A minute later, she returned looking nervous. Very nervous. "He would like to see you personally," she said. My stomach dropped. Personally. That word felt dangerous. I followed her down a quiet hallway lined with glass walls overlooking the city skyline. At the end stood a conference room larger than my entire apartment. Inside, a dozen executives sat around a polished table. Charts filled giant screens mounted on the walls. Nobody spoke when I entered. Every pair of eyes shifted toward me. Then I saw him. Ethan Carter sat at the head of the table wearing a charcoal suit and a white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled neatly to his forearms. He looked younger than he did in photographs. Less polished. More real. Yet somehow more intimidating. The room carried the kind of silence that only powerful people could create. I walked forward and placed the wallet on the table. "I think this belongs to you," I said. Ethan looked from the wallet to me. Then back to the wallet. Several executives exchanged surprised glances. One of them actually exhaled in relief. Ethan opened the wallet immediately. His expression changed. Not dramatically. Just enough for me to notice. Whatever document had been inside clearly mattered. A lot. "Thank you," he said quietly. I nodded and turned to leave. "Wait." His voice stopped me halfway to the door. I looked back. Ethan was still watching me. Not like a billionaire examining an employee. Not like a customer looking at hotel staff. It felt different somehow. As if he had just discovered something unexpected. "Most people would have handed this to security," he said. I shrugged. "Most people are probably smarter than me." For the first time, the corner of his mouth lifted into a small smile. And for reasons I could not explain, every person in that room suddenly looked shocked. I left the conference room expecting that moment to disappear from my life. People like Ethan Carter did not cross paths with people like me twice. That was how the world worked. The wealthy lived in glass towers above the clouds. The rest of us lived in reality. By the next morning, I had convinced myself the entire thing was over. I was wrong. 3 days later, I was carrying coffee service into one of the hotel's private meeting suites when I heard a familiar voice. My steps slowed. Not enough to attract attention, but enough to notice. Ethan sat at the far end of the room reviewing documents while several executives spoke around him. Sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows behind him, turning the Manhattan skyline into a wall of silver and gold. I kept my eyes down and focused on my work. Deliver the coffee. Leave the room. Continue the shift. Simple. At least it should have been. Grace. I froze. Nobody in that room should have known my name. Yet there he was looking directly at me. Every executive stopped talking. I turned slowly. "Yes?" I asked. Ethan nodded toward an empty coffee cup. "Would you mind a refill?" The request itself was ordinary. The reactions around the table were not. Several people exchanged confused glances. One woman actually looked offended. I poured the coffee carefully. "Thank you," Ethan said. Again, ordinary words. Yet the room somehow felt different afterward. As if everyone had witnessed something unusual. When I returned to the employee break room later that afternoon, the rumors had already started. Hotel gossip moved faster than the internet. 2 servers were discussing me when they thought I could not hear them. One claimed I was trying to get attention. Another suggested I had somehow planned the wallet incident. By dinner service, the story had evolved into something even more ridiculous. Apparently, I was secretly pursuing a billionaire. I almost laughed. The idea was absurd. My reality consisted of overdue bills, second-hand furniture, and grocery lists calculated down to the dollar. Ethan Carter existed in a world where entire companies rose and fell based on his decisions. Yet the whispers continued. The following week made things worse. Ethan appeared at the hotel 3 separate times. Each visit generated more attention. Each visit created new speculation. Most of it was harmless. Some of it was not. One evening, I overheard a group of wealthy guests discussing me near the ballroom entrance. They were not bothering to lower their voices. She probably thinks she hit the lottery. People always want something from men like him. Give it a month. He will forget she exists. Their laughter echoed across the marble floor. I kept walking. Responding would not change their minds. But the words stayed with me longer than I wanted to admit. That night, after my shift ended, I stepped outside into the cool spring air. The city lights stretched endlessly across Manhattan. Yellow taxis moved through the streets like streams of light. I was halfway toward the subway entrance when a black town car pulled quietly to the curb beside me. The rear window lowered. Ethan Carter looked out at me. Then he said something that made my heart skip a beat. "Grace, would you allow me to buy you a cup of coffee?" I stared through the open car window, convinced I had heard him wrong. People rushed along the sidewalk behind me. Taxi horns echoed through the evening traffic. Somewhere down the block, a siren wailed in the distance. Normal city sounds. Normal life. Yet nothing felt normal anymore. Ethan Carter was asking me to have coffee with him. Not a business meeting. Not a charity event. Coffee. The kind of thing ordinary people did every day. "I think there are probably better people you could ask," I said before I could stop myself. His expression shifted slightly, amused more than offended. "I did not ask other people." I hated how quickly that answer affected me. "You realize everyone already thinks I am trying to get something from you." Ethan glanced toward the hotel entrance where several employees were pretending not to watch us. "And are you?" The question was direct. Honest. I appreciated that. "No. That is what I thought." He opened the car door and stepped onto the sidewalk. The city seemed to react to him immediately. People recognized him. Some stared. Others whispered. Ethan ignored all of them. "There is a coffee shop 2 blocks away," he said. "No security teams. No reporters. No meetings. Just coffee." I should have said no. My life had enough complications already. Instead, 20 minutes later, I found myself sitting across from one of the most famous men in America inside a small corner cafe that smelled like cinnamon and fresh espresso beans. The place was surprisingly ordinary. Worn wooden tables. Local artwork on the walls. Soft jazz playing through ceiling speakers. Ethan seemed more comfortable there than he ever had inside the luxury hotel. We talked for almost an hour. Not about billion-dollar companies. Not about investments. Not about wealth. He asked about my mother. I told him about her health struggles. He asked about my commute. I told him about crowded subway trains and early mornings. He asked about my dreams. That question caught me off guard. Nobody had asked me that in years. "I used to want to open a community learning center," I admitted. "Somewhere people could access tutoring, job training, things like that." Ethan listened carefully. The way he listened surprised me most. Most wealthy guests treated conversations like competitions. Ethan treated them like discoveries. When the check arrived, he reached for it automatically. I reached for it too. His eyebrow lifted. "Grace. I can pay for my own coffee." "I know you can." Neither of us moved. Finally, he leaned back slightly. "You are the first person who has argued with me over a $6 coffee. Then you spend time with very strange people." For the second time since we met, I saw him genuinely laugh. The sound was warm. Unforced. Human. When we finally stood to leave, Ethan handed me a small envelope. My stomach tightened immediately. "What is this?" I asked. "A thank you." I did not even open it. I pushed it right back into his hand. "No." Ethan looked surprised. "Grace, you returned something extremely important. That does not mean I get paid for being honest." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then something changed in his expression. Respect. Real respect. as though I had just given him something far more valuable than the wallet itself. And as we stepped back onto the Manhattan sidewalk, I had the strange feeling that saying no to Ethan Carter was exactly what made him want to see me again. After that night, I expected the calls to stop. They did not. Not because Ethan overwhelmed me with attention. Quite the opposite. Days would pass without hearing from him. Then a simple message would arrive asking how my mother was feeling or whether I had survived another double shift. Somehow those short conversations became part of my routine. A strange part. An unexpected part. The dangerous part was that I started looking forward to them. One rainy Tuesday morning, I arrived at the hotel exhausted after sleeping less than 4 hours. My mother had experienced a difficult night, and I had spent most of it helping her. By the time I stepped into the employee entrance, my head ached and my patience was running low. The day only became worse. A guest complained about coffee that was too hot. Another complained that it was not hot enough. A supervisor criticized an event setup that I had not even worked on. By noon, I felt completely drained. During my lunch break, I sat alone in a small employee courtyard behind the hotel. The city noise felt distant there. For 10 precious minutes, I could pretend the world had stopped demanding things from me. That was when my phone buzzed. A text from Ethan. "How many people have annoyed you today?" I laughed before I could stop myself. The sound surprised me. It had been a while since anything felt funny. "Too many to count," I replied. His answer arrived seconds later. "Then I recommend coffee and stubborn optimism." I shook my head. Those are not real solutions. They are the only solutions I have ever trusted. I stared at the message longer than necessary. The truth was that Ethan fascinated me. Not because he was wealthy. Wealth explained very little about a person. What fascinated me was how different he seemed from the image everyone else described. The media portrayed him as a corporate giant. Investors treated him like a financial machine. Yet the man I knew asked about my mother and remembered details from conversations weeks earlier. Meanwhile, Ethan seemed equally curious about me. I learned this accidentally. One evening, he mentioned the community learning center idea I had discussed over coffee. Not only did he remember it, he remembered specific details. The tutoring programs. The career workshops. The after-school activities. Nobody had ever listened that carefully before. It unsettled me more than I wanted to admit. The following week, I discovered just how much attention he had been paying. I finished work late and stopped by a neighborhood grocery store before heading home. As I walked through the parking lot carrying 2 bags of groceries, I noticed a familiar black vehicle parked across the street. Not close enough to be intrusive. Just close enough to recognize. Through the windshield, I spotted Ethan sitting inside. He was not on his phone. He was not working. He was simply watching the entrance of the grocery store. When he realized I had seen him, he stepped out looking almost embarrassed. "What are you doing here?" I asked. Ethan looked toward the bags in my hands. Then back at me. I wanted to see where the woman who refuses every advantage actually buys her groceries. And for the first time since we met, I had absolutely no idea how to respond. The answer should have been simple. Instead, I stood in the grocery store parking lot staring at Ethan Carter while cold air drifted through the evening and my grocery bag slowly cut into my fingers. "You came here to watch me buy groceries?" I asked. Ethan looked completely serious. "When you say it out loud, it sounds strange." "Because it is strange." To my surprise, he laughed. Not the controlled laugh he used at business events. A real one. The kind that reached his eyes. For a moment he looked less like one of the richest men in America and more like a man who had done something ridiculous and knew it. "I was curious," he admitted. "About what?" "About how someone stays exactly the same when the world keeps offering reasons to change." I shook my head. "You give me far too much credit." "I do not think I do." The conversation stayed with me all the way home. It stayed with me while I unpacked groceries. It stayed with me while I helped my mother organize her medications. It even stayed with me after midnight when I finally collapsed into bed. The problem was not Ethan himself. The problem was how easy it had become to talk to him. How natural it felt. That scared me more than I wanted to admit. The following week brought a challenge I never saw coming. My mother had a follow-up appointment with a specialist. I had been waiting months for answers. Months of uncertainty. Months of hoping the next test would finally bring good news. Instead, I sat in a small consultation room listening to numbers I could barely process. Additional treatments. Additional expenses. Additional procedures. Each sentence felt heavier than the one before it. By the time I left the clinic, the stack of paperwork in my hands felt impossible. I sat alone on a bench outside the building. The sky above Queens was gray and heavy with rain. People walked past without noticing me. I stared at the estimates on the page. My savings would not cover it. Not even close. I would need extra shifts. More hours. Less sleep. Somehow I would make it work. I always did. My phone buzzed. Ethan. I considered ignoring it. Instead, I answered. Hey. He immediately noticed something was wrong. Grace. Just hearing my name in his voice almost broke me. What happened? I looked down at the paperwork. At the numbers. At the future that suddenly seemed so much harder than it had that morning. It is nothing, I said. That is not true. The silence stretched between us. Finally, I told him everything. Not because I wanted help. Not because I expected solutions. But because I was tired. Tired of carrying everything alone. Ethan listened without interrupting. When I finished, several seconds passed. Then he said something unexpected. I want to show you something tomorrow. I frowned. What does that have to do with any of this? Trust me. I almost refused. Almost. But something in his voice stopped me. The next afternoon, a black car arrived outside my apartment building. And when Ethan stepped out, he looked more determined than I had ever seen him before. The ride across the city lasted nearly 40 minutes, yet Ethan refused to tell me where we were going. Rain tapped softly against the windows while Manhattan blurred into streaks of silver and gray. I sat beside him trying not to imagine worst-case scenarios. My life had taught me that surprises were rarely good. Ethan seemed to sense my anxiety. Relax, he said. I am not about to sell you to a circus. I laughed despite myself. That is a very specific thing to say. I have been told my reassurance skills need improvement. The truth was they probably did. But somehow his awkward honesty made me trust him more. Eventually the car turned into a quiet neighborhood in Brooklyn. Tree-lined streets replaced skyscrapers. Small businesses replaced luxury towers. The vehicle stopped in front of a large brick building that looked recently renovated. I followed Ethan inside. The lobby smelled faintly of fresh paint and coffee. Sunlight streamed through oversized windows. Classrooms lined one side of the building. Computer labs filled another. A library occupied the center. Children worked with tutors. Adults attended career workshops. Seniors participated in technology classes. The entire place buzzed with life. I stopped walking. What is this? Ethan watched my reaction carefully. A community learning center. My heart skipped. What? He nodded toward a plaque mounted near the entrance. The center's mission statement described educational access, career development, tutoring programs, and community support services. Every detail sounded familiar. Too familiar. This is the idea you told me about, I whispered. Not exactly, Ethan replied. It is your idea. Mine was simply helping fund it. I turned toward him in disbelief. You built this? The project already existed in early planning stages. It needed investment. I happened to know someone who would not stop talking about how important programs like this could be. My eyes burned unexpectedly. I looked away before he could notice. Around us, people laughed. Students studied. Volunteers helped families fill out applications. The building felt alive in a way few places ever did. Why are you showing me this? I asked quietly. Ethan took a slow breath. Because yesterday, when you talked about your mother's medical expenses, you sounded like someone carrying the entire world alone. I looked down. He was not wrong. And because I wanted you to see something. What? His gaze met mine. Steady. Honest. Your dreams matter, Grace. Even if life keeps giving you reasons to believe otherwise. For several seconds I could not speak. Nobody had ever said those words to me before. Not like that. Not as though they genuinely believed them. We spent the next hour touring the building. Every room revealed another program designed to help people exactly like the families I had grown up around. Yet something felt strange. Ethan watched me the entire time. Not in an uncomfortable way. More like someone waiting for an answer. Finally, as we reached the front entrance, I noticed a framed document hanging beside the reception desk. At the bottom, beneath a list of major contributors, one name appeared in large letters. Ethan Carter. And directly underneath it, in much smaller print, was another line that made my heart stop. Inspired by a conversation with Grace Parker. The words hit harder than they should have. Inspired by a conversation with Grace Parker. I stared at the plaque while a dozen emotions collided inside me. Pride. Confusion. Gratitude. And beneath all of them, something uncomfortable. Ethan had taken an idea I mentioned during a casual conversation and turned it into something real. Something permanent. Something that could change lives. Most people would have been touched. Part of me was. Another part felt uneasy. On the drive home, I barely spoke. Ethan noticed immediately. He always seemed to notice. You have been quiet for 20 minutes, he said. Rain streaked across the windows as the city passed outside. I am thinking. That sounds dangerous. Normally I would have smiled. This time I did not. Ethan glanced toward me. The humor disappeared from his face. Grace? I looked down at my hands. Why did you do it? The learning center? Yes. He seemed surprised by the question. I already told you. No. You told me what you did. You never told me why. Silence filled the car. Finally Ethan answered. Because it was a good idea. I shook my head. There are thousands of good ideas in New York. His jaw tightened slightly. What are you really asking? I hated that he understood me so easily. I am asking whether you built it because you believed in the project or because of me. The question lingered between us. Heavy. Uncomfortable. Ethan looked out the window for several seconds before answering. Both. My chest tightened. Somehow that answer made everything worse. The next few days were difficult. Not because Ethan pressured me. He did the opposite. He gave me space. Yet the plaque kept replaying in my mind. The learning center. The conversations. The way he remembered every detail. I started wondering whether he saw me as a person or a project. Whether his generosity came from genuine respect or from being accustomed to fixing problems. Wealth gave people incredible power. Sometimes too much power. By the end of the week, my frustration finally boiled over. Ethan invited me to lunch at a small restaurant overlooking the Hudson River. The view was beautiful. I barely noticed it. Halfway through the meal, I set down my fork. You cannot solve everything with money. Ethan blinked. I know that. Do you? The question came out sharper than I intended. Several nearby conversations faded into the background. Ethan remained completely calm. Tell me what this is really about. I took a deep breath. People spend their whole lives trying to impress you. Trying to earn your attention. Then I come along and suddenly buildings are being funded because of conversations we had over coffee. Do you have any idea how that feels? For the first time since I met him, Ethan looked genuinely hurt. Not angry. Hurt. Grace, I never wanted you to feel indebted to me. That is exactly the problem. I stood up. My chair scraped softly against the floor. I need some time. Ethan did not try to stop me. He did not argue. He simply watched as I walked away. But just before I reached the restaurant door, his quiet voice followed me. I was never trying to buy your respect. And for the first time since we met, I was no longer sure what to believe. For 2 weeks, I did not hear from Ethan. No messages. No calls. No unexpected appearances outside grocery stores. Nothing. At first, I felt relieved. I told myself the distance was necessary. Healthy. Rational. Then I discovered how much silence can weigh when you have grown accustomed to someone's presence. Life returned to its normal rhythm. Early mornings. Long shifts. Medical appointments. Bills. Responsibilities. Yet something felt missing. One evening, after finishing work, I found my mother sitting by the apartment window watching the city lights. She looked stronger than she had in weeks. The sight alone felt like a gift. You are thinking too loudly, she said without turning around. I smiled. Is that even possible? For you? Absolutely. She finally looked at me. It is the businessman. I groaned immediately. Mom. So it is him. I should have denied it. Instead, I sat beside her. The apartment was quiet except for the distant sound of traffic drifting through the glass. For several moments neither of us spoke. Then she asked the question I had been avoiding myself. Why are you angry with him? The answer should have been simple. It was not. Because I do not know why he cares. My mother studied me carefully. And if he simply does? I looked away. People like him do not simply care. The next afternoon, I received a call from an unfamiliar number. I almost ignored it. Almost. Grace? The voice belonged to Ethan. My heart reacted before my brain could stop it. Hi. A brief silence followed. Not uncomfortable. Just cautious. I owe you an explanation, he said. I closed my eyes. Part of me wanted to hang up. A larger part wanted to listen. Then explain. Several seconds passed. When Ethan finally spoke again, his voice sounded different. Less controlled. More vulnerable. When I was 14, my father lost everything. I frowned. That was not the answer I expected. What? We lived in a 2-bedroom apartment over a hardware store in Ohio. My parents worked constantly. Then one bad year became 2. Then 3. I listened quietly. People stopped returning calls. Friends disappeared. Neighbors treated us differently. I learned very quickly that most people respect success, not character. The city noise faded around me. I could hear only his voice. A teacher noticed what was happening, he continued. She stayed after school helping students for free. She paid for supplies out of her own pocket. She made people feel seen. I swallowed hard. What happened to her? She changed lives. His answer came immediately. Mine included. Suddenly pieces began falling into place. The learning center. The questions. The attention he paid whenever I talked about helping others. Grace, he said softly, the reason I listen to you is because you remind me of the people who helped when nobody else did. I stood frozen on the sidewalk outside my apartment building. I never built anything because I wanted you to owe me something. His voice lowered. I did it because your ideas deserve to exist. My chest tightened. For the first time since our argument, I realized I might have misunderstood everything. Then Ethan said one final sentence that left me completely speechless. The truth is, you matter to me far more than you realize. After that phone call, something changed between us. Not immediately. Not dramatically. But enough. The wall I had built around my assumptions began to crack. For the first time, I allowed myself to consider that Ethan might actually mean everything he said. 2 weeks later, an invitation arrived at the hotel. It was for one of the largest charity galas in New York. The event would raise millions for educational programs across the country. Normally, I would never have attended something like that. People in my position served at those events. We did not walk through the front entrance as guests. Yet Ethan insisted. You should be there, he said. Why? I asked. Because the work matters. And because you matter. Against my better judgment, I agreed. The evening of the gala felt surreal from the beginning. The venue occupied the top floor of a luxury tower overlooking Manhattan. Crystal chandeliers reflected across polished marble floors. The skyline glittered beyond enormous windows. Everywhere I looked, wealth seemed to glow. Women wore designer gowns worth more than my annual rent. Men discussed investments worth millions of dollars as casually as grocery lists. I immediately felt out of place. Ethan noticed the moment I entered. He crossed the ballroom and greeted me with a warm smile that somehow made the room feel smaller. Easier to breathe in. For a while, things went surprisingly well. We spoke with donors, educators, community leaders, people genuinely interested in helping others. Then the whispers started. At first they were subtle. A glance. A smirk. A raised eyebrow. Then they became harder to ignore. I overheard 2 women standing near the champagne table. That is her, one asked quietly. I expected someone more impressive. The other laughed. Apparently all you need these days is a good sob story. I pretended not to hear them. 10 minutes later, another group began speculating about my background. According to them, I was chasing attention. Chasing status. Chasing wealth. None of them knew me. None of them cared to. They had already decided who I was. The worst moment came during dinner. I was seated near several influential guests when a woman across the table smiled politely and asked where I had attended school. I answered honestly. Community college before life interrupted my plans. The smile on her face changed instantly. How inspiring, she said. The words sounded kind. Her tone did not. A few people laughed softly. Another guest commented that success stories always made charity events more entertaining. My face burned. Not because I was ashamed of my life. Because they viewed it like a performance. Like a curiosity. Like something to discuss over expensive wine. For several minutes I sat there silently. The room suddenly felt too warm. Too loud. Too crowded. Finally I excused myself and stepped onto a terrace overlooking the city. Cold night air filled my lungs. Below me, Manhattan stretched endlessly into the darkness. I gripped the railing and tried to regain my composure. Then I heard familiar footsteps behind me. Ethan had followed me outside. One look at my face was all it took. His expression hardened immediately. What happened? He asked quietly. And as I turned toward him, I realized the people inside had no idea how badly they had underestimated the man standing beside me. For a moment, I considered telling Ethan nothing. Pretending everything was fine. Pretending the comments had not affected me. But I was tired of pretending. So I told him. Not every word. Not every insult. Just enough. I watched his expression carefully as I spoke. Ethan did not interrupt once. He did not ask questions. He simply listened. The city lights reflected in his eyes while the cold wind moved across the terrace. When I finished, silence settled between us. Then Ethan looked through the glass doors toward the ballroom. "Stay here," he said quietly. Something in his voice made my heart race. Before I could respond, he turned and walked back inside. I followed several steps behind. The ballroom remained crowded. Conversations filled the room. Laughter echoed beneath the chandeliers. Nobody seemed to notice Ethan crossing the floor until he stepped onto the stage near the main podium. Gradually the noise faded. Hundreds of guests turned toward him. Donors. Executives. Politicians. Reporters. Every eye focused on the billionaire everyone came to see. Ethan accepted the microphone from the event host. His calm expression returned. The same expression I remembered from the engagement announcement months later. The room grew silent. "Before we continue tonight," he began, "there is something I would like to say." Around the ballroom, people exchanged curious looks. Ethan rarely spoke publicly without purpose. "We have spent the evening discussing education, opportunity, and community investment." His voice carried effortlessly across the room. "We have spoken about helping people reach their potential." He paused. What interests me is how often those conversations disappear when an actual person walks into the room. A few smiles faded. A few guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Ethan continued. "Tonight I watched remarkable people judge someone they know absolutely nothing about." The room became very still. My pulse quickened. Several guests glanced toward me. Ethan noticed. So did everyone else. Many assume success comes from titles, degrees, connections, wealth. His gaze swept across the ballroom. "In my experience, character matters far more." Nobody laughed now. Nobody whispered. Ethan stepped away from the podium and pointed toward the audience. Toward me. "Grace Parker works harder than most people I have ever met." My breath caught. "She cares about others when it would be easier not to. She keeps her promises. She shows up when people need her. She gives credit away and accepts responsibility. Those qualities cannot be purchased." The silence deepened. "The truth is simple," Ethan continued. "Some of the most impressive people I know will never appear on magazine covers. They will never own private jets. They will never have billion-dollar companies." His eyes met mine across the room. "But they make the world better every single day." I could not move. I could barely breathe. Around me, faces that once carried amusement now looked embarrassed. Thoughtful. Ashamed. Ethan lowered the microphone slightly. "If you measure people by their bank account, you will miss the best individuals you ever meet." Then he smiled. Not at the crowd. Not at the cameras. At me. And in that moment, every person in the ballroom finally understood exactly where his heart already belonged. The months that followed changed my life in ways I never could have imagined. Not because I suddenly became wealthy. Not because reporters started recognizing my face. Not because people who once dismissed me suddenly changed their opinions. The real change happened somewhere much quieter. It happened in the small moments. The ordinary moments. The moments that actually matter. My mother's health slowly improved. Not overnight. Not perfectly. But enough that hope no longer felt impossible. The community learning center continued growing beyond anything Ethan or I expected. More students enrolled. More families found support. More people walked through those doors believing their future could be different from their past. Every time I visited, I remembered the conversation that started it all. Meanwhile, Ethan remained exactly who he had always been. The world still saw the billionaire. I saw the man who remembered birthdays, called to check on my mother, and somehow knew when I was pretending everything was fine. One evening, nearly 6 months after the charity gala, we stood together on the rooftop terrace of the Learning Center during its expansion celebration. The sun was setting behind the city skyline, painting the buildings in shades of gold and amber. Below us, children laughed in the courtyard. Families gathered for the event. Volunteers shared stories. The place felt alive. Ethan rested his hands on the railing and looked out across the city. "Do you know what is funny?" he asked. "That depends." For years, people kept asking me the secret to success. I smiled. "And?" He glanced toward me. They were asking the wrong question. The evening breeze moved gently through the air. "What was the right question?" I asked. Ethan's expression softened. "Who you become while achieving it." For a moment neither of us spoke. We simply stood there watching the city lights begin to appear one by one. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and removed something small. My heart immediately began racing. "Ethan." He laughed quietly. "Relax. I am not making a speech." The small velvet box in his hand suggested otherwise. I covered my face while he shook his head, smiling. "The most remarkable thing about you, Grace, is that you never cared about any of this." He gestured toward the skyline. "The buildings. The success. The reputation. You cared about people." My eyes filled with tears before I could stop them. "And somehow," he continued softly, "you reminded me what all of this was supposed to be for." The answer I gave him was the easiest answer of my life. Years later, people would still tell our story. They would talk about the billionaire. The headlines. The public moments. The glamorous parts. But they always missed the truth. The truth was never about wealth. It was never about status. It was never about being chosen by someone powerful. The truth was much simpler. Character is invisible until the right person sees it. And when they do, it becomes impossible to ignore. Because money can attract attention. Success can earn admiration. But kindness, integrity, and a good heart will always be worth more than anything money can buy.